Hello everyone, Jonathan here from Triple M Games, and in this video I'm going to be showcasing my TMG camera panel add-on for Blender 2.93 and 3.0. I won't be going over every feature, but I'll be going through the new stuff. First off, I've added an object context menu, so whenever you select different objects, mainly you can change the names. So if you have object and you have object data, you can change the names separately, or you can link them so you just have to name it once. There's not much for mesh objects yet, but for lighting, I've added some pretty interesting things. So you can see the beam shape. Let's see here. If I change that over to spot, you can change the size. You can change the blend amount. Let me turn up the power here to 150. And then if you change the blend, you can change how sharp the lighting is. And the radius. You can change the color. It's a little bit hard to see. Let's change that up to 200. There, 500. You can see the colors changing. You can change how much the diffuse is affected, the specular, and volume. And, alright, we'll showcase the fun stuff. I've added a randomize feature. This is based off of Curtis Holt's video. I will leave a link in the description. He left some pretty useful tips on how you could randomize colors and stuff. I ran with it and I added my own custom menu. So you can change what random type you want the lights to be. So if you don't want it to be like the sunlight and you just want point, spot, and area, you can do that. Or if you just want spot and area, let me just showcase what this does. So if I click randomize, it has selected area. Select it again, it's still area. It's changed over to spot. It's changed over to point. And as many times as I randomize it, it should never land on sun. Or you can get creative and just set it to a single one to set all of your selected lights to the area. But wait a minute, this is object context. Well, I took it a little further and I made it to where it's all selected lights. Check sun. So as you can see, they're all randomizing. And if you select one light and then you unselect it, you can still randomize the active light. Currently I'm not getting much effect from that, so I'm going to change it to area, and I'm going to go down here to energy, and I'm going to set the lower value to 150, I'll set the maximum value to 200, and we should see some better lighting. I'm going to erase a few of these lights, and then I'm going to arrange them around the object. That way we can get a better view of what this is doing. And see, if I were to select the one of the meshes, and if I can press A, we have selected all the lights, it notices that we have lights selected, and then we can change the lights. So it doesn't matter if you have other objects selected, it will only affect the lighting data. You can even limit the colors. So if I change this to red, and I don't want green, and I don't want blue, we'll get various shades of red. Or maybe I want some blue, and maybe I want that at like 0.5. We'll change this down to 0.5 too. And you can press Shift R as well. You can press Control Z to undo, Control Shift Z to redo. maybe we want more green and we don't want any blue, so we can get more of a yellow, orangish hue set up. Maybe you just want green. So, or maybe you don't want to randomize the color or the type, so you can just unselect those and you don't have to see the values anymore. You can adjust the diffuse so it's always at 1, or you can bring it down to where it's limited to only about the 0.2 range. And you can unselect diffuse and it won't affect it. You can unselect energy and it won't affect energy, size, specular, and volume. So one thing I did to the camera was I changed the perspective's default value. So if I set the camera to active and then I go to the camera view, I set the sensor profile to 50 by default instead of 24, so it's more general use case versus abstract or exaggerated. The other thing I did was I changed the render resolution. This way we can set the resolution per camera. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select our camera. I'm going to duplicate it a few times. Then I'm going to go into the camera view. I'll frame that up a bit. Now, if I were to change the resolution, I'm going to showcase the dimensions. So we can affect the dimensions on this one camera. I'm going to set it to 128 by 64, just an exaggerated value. And I'm going to change over here. Since we have the lock value set to constant, all the cameras are going to be 128 by 64. But if we set it per camera, notice that it changed to 1920 by 1080, the default value. Now I'm going to change this to 128 by 64. And then I'm going to change it over to this camera. It's 1920 by 1080. And 1920 by 1080, go back to the first camera, 128 by 64. So if I set this camera over to 400 by 500, switch back, we've got 128 by 64, 400 by 500, and 1920 by 1080. If we change this over to preset, it will set it to like VGA, HD, high definition, or full definition, 2K, 4K, and 8K. And of course this will be set per, well, for all the cameras. It's constant. I might make it later to where the per camera can be set with this, but for now, this is what we got. And notice that it didn't affect the per camera settings. Another thing we have is aspect. So if I set this to portrait, we have 64 by 128, so it swaps the values. If I set this over to box, it uses the X value, and it puts it on both of them. So I'm going to set this to landscape. I'm going to go over to this one. I'm going to set it to box. And I'm going to set this one to portrait. So you can change the aspect as well as the resolution per camera if you want to. The values also change when swapping over to cycles. So for sampling, you have the advanced, and you also have denoising, as well as the sample count. Notice for Eevee, you won't see the same menus because it only has one sample menu. Now keep in mind, this menu is going to look different in 3.0 beta. So here we are in 3.0 beta. If I go into render, and then I go into sampling, you'll notice that the noise is different. So you can enable and disable the render denoising or the viewport denoising. The sample is also different. And if I change over to Eevee, we only have the render and viewport denoising. And also the passes is different as well. So sometimes we have different effects and filters for Eevee or cycles. Also the scene effects. You'll notice that ambient occlusion and bloom are removed whenever you're in cycles. I've also added volumetrics to the scene effects, so you can adjust if it has lighting or if it's affected by shadows. You can adjust the tile size. A larger tile size is better performance, but you end up with less detail. Smaller tile size, you end up with more detail, but it's a higher performance cost. You can affect the samples. Lower values, less samples. Higher values, more samples, more performance drain. We're back in Blender 2.93. I want to show what we can do with constraints. I've probably done this a few times in the past, but it's still fun to try. I like adding a circle to the scene, going over to constraints, and I want to add a floor constraint. I'm going to set this to the Bezier circle. One thing I want to do while I have it selected, I want to change this over to maybe control circle. And then I'm going to add a follow path. I'm going to set this over to control circle. So we can now scale the circle as well as change the position of the camera. You can also set the offset height, so you can rotate the view around in a more controlled way using this widget. Or you can zoom in with the magnifying glass icon. Or you can move the camera around with the hand icon. Now notice we're using a floor constraint and a path follow constraint, so this isn't exactly the best way to move your camera around. In fact, I recommend selecting your camera, then pressing Alt and G, so we are now exactly above the Bezier circle. We can adjust it a little bit easier. We can even control where we are on the Bezier circle. But I like to add a track 2, which another thing I like to do is Shift A, where you're going to add an empty sphere. I'm going to press G and Z to move it up. And we're going to add a track 2 to the camera. And we will select our empty, which I also like to rename to focus. And down here in the context menu. So now, if we adjust the offset, we are looking at the empty. And then if we adjust where we are on the path, we get to see exactly where that empty is. So if I were to move that over here, and then adjust our path, we are always going to be looking at the empty. I'm just going to press Ctrl Z to move it back. You can adjust the fixed position. It will change the value between 0 and 1. So that is the complete path. You can change the curve radius. I don't do that much because it's adjusted by the scale. You can also do the follow curve. So if you uncheck the track 2, your camera will always be looking at the curve's normals, which will be good in an example I'll show you here in a moment. So I'm just going to uncheck that, and then I'm going to rotate out of the view. I'm going to create another curve, and I'm going to call this one a path this time. I'm going to press G and Y. I'm going to find out exactly which direction this is by turning on the handle normals. I'm going to rotate Z 90 negative. I'm just going to leave that alone and move the points exactly where I want the start and end to be. I'm going to dissolve the middle ones by pressing X and dissolve vertices. And I can hide the handle normals now. I'm going to take this camera. I believe it is that. Yes. I'm going to press Alt and G. It is now moved to the center. I'm going to give it a floor constraint. I'm also going to select our path. I'm going to rename it to line path. And then if we look for our line, that is now our floor, and I can adjust how high up it is. And follow path, the line path. I'm going to set fixed position. And for this one, I'm just going to do follow curve. I'm also going to give it a track 2. This is going to be our focus object. And then we will jump into camera view. You can scale the path, or you can just look along the path. There, that's better. One fun thing I like to do, I'm going to go back to our other camera. I'm going to rename this to circle, actually C_circle. Anyways, camera circle. And I'll rename this one to C line, so we can easily find which camera we're on. And I want to adjust the offset, but I don't want to have to do it manually. I don't want to have to set up keyframes for it. I just want it to rotate one whole rotation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the offset and type in #frame divided by 2. I'm going to exit full screen mode here. I'm going to bring up our timeline. Then, if I press Shift and Spacebar, or I can click the play button, we'll hopefully get one rotation, which I think it's a little bit past it. So we can set the endpoint to around 200, I think. So between 0 and 200. If you want that value to be a little higher, you can set that to 3, and the camera will now rotate slower. So what you'd have to do is set this to 300. And those are the new features of TMG Camera Tools add-on for Blender 2.93 and 3.0. If you like what you see and you'd like to try it out for free, you can get it on GitHub, or if you'd like to donate and support me, you can get it on Gumroad and Blender Market. Also on GitHub, there's a discussions page. If you'd like to request a feature, that would be the best place to do it, I think. Or you can just open up an issue as well, and I'll read through them and see what I can do. And remember, links are in the description. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.